This is a true horror story. For the full experience, put on your headphones. Honestly, I've been sitting on this for about 6 months. Every time I open a new doc to type it out, I end up closing my laptop and staring at the wall for an hour. I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like some creepypasta or something you'd hear around a campfire to scare kids, but I'm telling you, I haven't been back to West Virginia since October, and I don't think I ever will. My name is Elias. I'm a land surveyor. Usually, my job is pretty boring, just mapping out property lines and checking elevations for timber companies. Last fall, I got a contract near a tiny town called Marlington, right on the edge of the Monongahela National Forest. It was deep, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, the kind of place where your GPS stops working 20 miles before you hit the job site, and the local radio is just static and bluegrass. I was staying in this off-grid cabin. It wasn't even a cabin, really. It was more like a shed with wood siding and a propane stove. No Wi-Fi, no cell service. Just me, my gear, and miles of old-growth forest. It was fine at first. I liked the quiet. Or I thought I did. The first few days were normal, just cold. The air up there in October is sharp. It feels like breathing in needles. But on Tuesday, things started feeling off. I was out near a dry creek bed, about 3 miles from the cabin. I was setting up my tripod when I realized I couldn't hear any birds. Now look, I know people say the woods went silent in every horror story, but this wasn't just a lack of chirping, it was a total sensory vacuum. No wind in the hemlocks, no squirrels. Even the creek, which had a tiny bit of runoff, seemed muffled. I checked my ears. I thought maybe the altitude was messing with my sinuses. Then I saw the first one. About 50 yards up the ridge, there was a deer, a buck. It was just standing there, which isn't weird. What was weird was its posture. It was leaning. Not like it was hurt, but like it was a cardboard cutout that someone had propped up at a 45-degree angle. It didn't move. It didn't blink. I watched it for 5 minutes, and it didn't even twitch an ear to ward off flies. I threw a rock at it, not to hit it, just to see it run. The rock landed maybe 3 feet from its front hooves. The buck didn't flinch. It just tipped. Slowly. It stayed in that rigid, leaning pose until it hit the ground with a heavy, wet thud. It didn't try to get up. It just laid there, slanted against the leaves. I didn't go check on it. I'm not a biologist, but I know when something is wrong with the hardware. I packed my gear and hiked back to the cabin. That night, I heard the humming. It wasn't outside. It was coming from the floorboards, a low, vibrating frequency that made the water in my glass ripple. It sounded like a massive transformer, but there wasn't a power line for 30 miles. Wednesday morning, I woke up and the smell hit me. It wasn't rot. It smelled like ozone and burnt pennies, that sharp metallic tang that sticks to the back of your throat. I went to my truck to grab my backup battery. When I looked at the windshield, I froze. There were handprints all over the glass, dozens of them, but they weren't on the outside. They were on the inside. I hadn't locked the truck the night before. There's no one out there to steal it. But I knew I hadn't been inside it since 5 p.m. The prints were small, too narrow to be a man's, but too long to be a kid's. And they were oily. They left this rainbow sheen on the glass, like gasoline on a puddle. I'm standing there, heart hammering against my ribs, trying to tell myself a hiker must have broken in, but the doors were still shut tight, The locks were down. I decided to hell with the contract. I was going to pack up and head into town. I went back into the cabin to grab my laptop, and that's when I saw the glitch. I have a digital clock on the bedside table. It's a cheap, battery-operated thing. The numbers were drifting. The 2 from the 8:24 a.m. was slowly sliding down the screen, leaving a trail of black liquid crystal behind it. It wasn't a broken screen. It was like the physics of the display had just given up. I grabbed my bag and ran for the door, but I stopped dead on the porch. The forest was gone. I don't mean it was invisible. I mean it looked like a low-resolution photograph. The trees 50 feet away were sharp, but everything past that was a blurry, pixelated mess of greens and browns. No depth, no detail, just a flat wall of color. I rubbed my eyes until I saw spots, thinking I was having a stroke. When I looked back, the blurriness was closer. It was moving toward the cabin. I scrambled into my truck and cranked the engine. It sputtered, coughing out that metallic ozone smell before finally roaring to life. I jammed it into reverse and backed out of the clearing, keeping my eyes locked on the rearview mirror. That's when I saw him. He was standing right where the blurred forest met the real ground. He looked like a man, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, but his proportions were sickening. His arms were about 4 inches too long. His knees bent slightly outwards, and he was doing exactly what I was doing. Every move I made to shift gears, he mimicked. I put my hand on the steering wheel. He lifted his hand in the air. I looked over my shoulder. He snapped his head back at the same angle. I floored it. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. I just kept my eyes glued to the dirt track, white-knuckling the steering wheel until my knuckles went numb. The truck was bouncing so hard over the ruts I thought the axle would snap, but I didn't care. I just needed to get to the main road. I needed to see asphalt and power lines. I needed to see something that followed the rules. But the deeper I drove, the worse it got. The road started to loop. I know how that sounds. I know. You think I just got turned around because I was panicking. But I've been a surveyor for 10 years. I live by topographical maps. I know every bend in that access road. There's a specific spot where an old oak tree was struck by lightning. It split right down the middle, charred black. I passed it. And then 4 minutes later, I passed it again. And again. The third time I saw that tree, I slammed on the brakes. I sat there in the cab, gasping for air, the engine idling with this sickening, wet, rattling sound. I looked at the passenger seat. My GPS unit was sitting there. I grabbed it, desperate for some kind of coordinate. But the screen was just a solid block of static. Not electronic static, it looked like gray ants crawling under the glass. I rolled the window down just a crack. The smell of wet copper was so thick now it tasted like I'd been sucking on a mouthful of nickels. And then the sounds started again. It wasn't the hum this time. It was a voice. It sounded like it was coming from the truck's speakers, even though the radio was off. It was my voice, but it was wrong. It was like someone had taken a recording of me and chopped it up, then glued it back together with no spaces between the words. Honestly, look, I'm not kidding. Elias, stop the truck. I screamed. I actually screamed. I threw the GPS unit out the window and floored it, fishtailing the truck. I didn't stay on the road. I couldn't. The road was a trap. I just pointed the hood toward what I thought was east and drove over the brush, praying the tires wouldn't pop. About a mile into the brush, the truck died. Not a slow stall, just pop, Like a fuse blew in the universe. Everything went dark. No dashboard lights, no headlights, nothing. And the silence that followed was heavy. It felt like it was pressing against the glass, trying to get in. I sat there in the pitch black, my heart hitting my ribs so hard it actually hurt. I reached for my flashlight on the floorboard. My hand brushed something cold. It was oily, that same gasoline slick texture I'd seen on the windshield. I clicked the light on, and the man in the flannel shirt, the thing, was sitting in the back seat. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't feel the truck shift. He was just there. In the beam of the maglite, he looked even worse. His skin wasn't skin. It looked like compressed ash. There were no pores, no hair, just this matte, gray surface. And his face. Look, I'm trying to find the words. It wasn't that he didn't have features. It was that they were in the wrong places. His mouth was too high, tucked right under his nose. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and the pupils weren't round. They were vertical slits, like a cat's, but they were vibrating rapidly. He didn't move. He just stared at me. And then he did the most unsettling thing I've ever experienced. He mimicked my breathing. I was hyperventilating, taking short, jagged gasps. He started doing it too. His chest moved in perfect synchronization with mine. "What do you want?" I choked out. He didn't answer. He just opened his mouth. Inside, there wasn't a tongue or teeth. It was just a hollow black throat that seemed to go down forever. And from that throat came the sound of a 911 dispatch call. 911, what is your emergency? I'm at the cabin. He's in the truck. Oh God, he's in the truck. It was my voice, but it was a recording of something I hadn't even said yet. I didn't think. I just threw myself out of the driver's side door. I hit the dirt hard, skinning my palms, and I ran. I didn't grab my gear. I didn't grab my jacket. I just ran into the blurry part of the woods. As soon as I hit that line, the part where the trees looked like low-res pixels, the world changed. The ground felt like sponge. The air was cold, but it didn't move. It was stagnant. I looked down at my hands. My fingers were trailing ghosts behind them, like a mouse cursor on an old monitor. Every time I moved, a dozen transparent versions of my hand followed a split second behind. I was losing my resolution. That's the only way I can describe it. I felt like I was being pulled apart, atom by atom, into something simpler, something less real. I saw the cabin ahead, but it wasn't the cabin I'd stayed in. It was a sketch of it, just the basic shape, white and featureless, sitting in a clearing of gray static. And standing on the porch were 3 of them, all in flannel, all with those long, twitching arms. They weren't attacking. They were just waiting, like they were waiting for the file to finish downloading. I turned and ran the other way. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire. I ran until the blur started to sharpen again, until the ground felt like real dirt and the trees had bark instead of smears of color. I hit the highway around 4 a.m. A semi-truck driver nearly hit me. He said I looked like I'd been crawled through a briar patch. But he also said something that still keeps me up at night. He said, "Son, why are you transparent?" I spent 2 weeks in a hospital in Charleston. They told me I had severe dehydration and environmental psychosis. They said the metallic smell was just a localized gas leak from an old mine shaft, but they couldn't explain the handprints on my chest. When they took my shirt off in the ER, there were 3 oily, rainbow sheen handprints burned into my skin, right over my heart. They didn't hurt, they just vibrated. I'm back in Ohio now. I quit the surveying job. I work in a warehouse. No woods, no mountains, no silence. I keep the TV on 24/7 because I can't stand the quiet. But here's the thing. Sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth or looking in the mirror, I'll see a glitch, just for a microsecond. My reflection will lag. I'll move my head and my reflection will stay still for a beat before catching up. And the oily prints, they aren't fading, they're spreading. Last night I woke up and the floorboards in my apartment were humming. I looked at my digital alarm clock on the nightstand. The 3 was sliding down the screen. I don't think I escaped. I think I'm just a copy. And somewhere out in the Monongahela National Forest, the real Elias is still standing by a dry creek bed, leaning at a 45-degree angle, waiting for the rest of the world to stop loading. Look, if you're planning a trip to the mountains, if you're looking for that off-grid experience, just be careful. If the birds stop singing, don't wait. Don't look at the deer, just get in your car and drive. And whatever you do, don't look in the back seat. I hear you. You want the rest of it. The part I usually skip because it's where my brain starts to actually fracture. I told you about the truck, and I told you about the hospital, but I left out the 3 days in between. The gap. Because I didn't just run to the highway. I couldn't. I was trapped in a loop of that mountain for 72 hours. And what happened in that garage, that's the reason I can't look at my own mother in the eye anymore. After the truck died, and I saw that thing in the back seat, I didn't just run blindly. My instinct took me back toward the cabin because, in my head, a building meant a door, and a door meant a lock. It was stupid. It was horror movie character levels of stupid, but when your reality is melting, you go toward the only familiar shape you can see. I didn't go into the main cabin, though. I saw those 3 figures on the porch, those long-armed, flannel-wearing glitches, and I veered left toward the detached garage. It was an old, sagging structure, mostly used for storing rusted-out tractors and kerosene. I dived through the side door and through the bolt. I collapsed against the wood, my breath coming in those jagged, hyperventilating hitches. The sound was coming from the corner of the garage. I whipped my flashlight around. It wasn't one of the things. It was a pile of... I don't even know. It looked like human clothes, but they were filled with wet sand, and they were breathing. The flannel was rising and falling in perfect sync with me. I backed away, tripping over a workbench. My light hit the floor, and that's when I saw the assets. That's the word that keeps popping into my head. Assets. The garage was filled with them. There were rows of deer, all leaning at that same 45-degree angle, stacked like firewood. There were trees that were just brown cylinders without bark, and in the back, under a heavy canvas tarp, there were the people. I shouldn't have pulled the tarp back. Underneath were dozens of me. Not clones, not twins. They were versions of me in different stages of being rendered. One was just a wireframe of white light. Another was a fleshy, faceless mannequin, and one was perfect. It was wearing my watch. It had the scar on its chin from when I fell off my bike at 10 years old. It was lying there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, and as I watched, its pupils started to vibrate. Then the power, whatever power was holding this pocket of the world together, just cut. The low hum in the floorboards stopped. The light from my mag light didn't just go out, the beam froze. I could see the cone of light hanging in the air like a solid object made of yellow glass, but it didn't illuminate anything. I was standing in total, absolute sensory deprivation, except for the smell, the burnt pennies, the wet copper. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a grab, it was a placement. A long, oily finger traced the line of my collarbone, and then a voice, not the chopped-up recording, but a smooth, synthesized version of my own voice, whispered directly into my inner ear. Occupied. This instance is occupied. The garage door didn't open. The wall just ceased to be. I fell backward into the dirt, out of the sketch of the building and back into the blurry woods. I don't remember the hike to the highway. I have flashes. I remember seeing a bird frozen mid-flight, hanging in the air like it was glued to the sky. I remember stepping over a creek where the water was just a static image of ripples, hard as ice but warm to the touch. When that truck driver finally picked me up and he asked why I was transparent, I looked down at my hands. I could see the dashboard of his semi through my palms. I wasn't a ghost, I was just low opacity. I stayed in that hospital, and eventually my resolution came back. The doctors called it a recovery. I called it a patch. But here's why I couldn't stay in my house, why I moved to a windowless apartment in a city where the noise never stops. I was sitting in my living room 2 weeks after I got home. I was trying to eat a bowl of cereal. I dropped the spoon. It didn't hit the floor. It stayed there, hovering 2 inches above the hardwood, vibrating. I stared at it for 10 minutes. I cried. I begged it to fall. I reached out to touch it, and as soon as my finger grazed the metal, it snapped to the floor with a loud clatter, like the physics engine had finally caught up. I went to the bathroom to wash my face, and I saw the me from the garage in the mirror. It wasn't a different person, it was me, but it was too perfect. The skin was too smooth, the eyes were too bright, and for a split second, I saw my own reflection blink while my eyes stayed open. I packed a bag in 5 minutes. I didn't take my laptop, I didn't take my photos. I realized that everything in that house, the furniture, the books, the memories, felt like it was being streamed. Like if I looked away fast enough, I'd see the gray static behind the wallpaper. I'm not Elias anymore. Elias is a file that got corrupted in a garage in West Virginia. I'm just the data that's left. I'm sitting in a 24-hour diner right now while I write this. The fluorescent lights are flickering in a pattern that I'm starting to decode. If I sit very still, I can feel the vibration in my heart. The 3 oily handprints, they've moved. They're on my neck now. Sometimes I'll be walking down the street and I'll see a person, a stranger, who is leaning just slightly at a 45-degree angle. And they'll look at me and their pupils will vibrate. And I'll know. We're all just waiting for the server to crash.